Welcome to the Factors in History podcast, where we talk about all things history. I'm Patrick Hurley. Today we're talking about history in the making. We have a very special podcast for y'all. I have three very special guests here today. I've been trying to get them on the show for a while, but they have been very busy fighting the biggest war in history. So it's very hard, but we finally made it happen. So it's a real pleasure for me to introduce our three guests. First of all, the President of the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, also known as FDR, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Winston Churchill, and the leader of the Soviet Union, Comrade Joseph Stalin. Welcome to each of you. Together you form what's called the Allies, and you've just about defeated the Axis powers in what we call World War II. The war in the East against Japan is still ongoing, but overall the war against the Nazis in Europe or West is almost over. So let's start with you, Mr. President.
Well, I have to admit it will be my successor, Mr. Truman, who will finish the war. I think since health is an issue right now. But yes, we are almost there in both the West and the East. We are confident we will win this war, in the next few months.
Mr. President, we're here to talk about the Second War, or World War II. Have you been a first-hand witness to war, and have you been a participant?
Yes. I was a prisoner when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor in 1941. And I asked Congress to formally declare war on the Axis powers, or at least Japan. But I have to admit, Hitler had beat me to it by declaring war on the US first. But no matter, once we declare war, I know we have to focus on several things in order to win.
Can you tell us what you did to prepare to fight this war, and how did you strategize to fight it?
First of all, I knew we had to have the war material. We need to fight such massive war. So I pressed the American military industrial complex to increase their production. And I had the army start up the draft to bring in more soldiers. We call this mobilization. Our corporations began to manufacture tanks, planes, guns, and ammunition. They started building big Navy boats like destroyers and aircraft carriers. And as Americans, we were lucky. We have a good geographic position. We have two oceans protecting us. So it was not easy for the Axis armies to attack our homeland or destroy our factories. So mobilization took off, and once it did, it helped us produce a huge arsenal. In fact, we had so many trucks and planes that we could be able to give thousands away to our great friend and ally, Uncle Joe. Joe Stalin, that is. We found a way to go around the German armies and ship thousands of trucks to our Russian allies so they could attack from the east. We call it the Land-Lease Act, but we didn't mind if they never paid us back. The important thing is they used what we gave them to push towards Berlin from the east, and we all win the war.
Can you tell us about your recent conference?
Yes, we had a wonderful conference in Tehran. We talked about how we could divide up the world once we defeat the Axis and win the war. Basically, we will give Uncle Joe most of our Eastern Europe my friend Churchill will help us run Western Europe, and then the United States will run Japan and other parts of Asia.
What are the implications of the end of World War II for you and for Western civilization?
Well, that's a wonderful question. First of all, for me, personally, gives it me a great satisfaction to know we've overcome evil and brought freedom to millions. I'm afraid, with my failing health, I might not be able to survive to see the actual end of the war, and that saddens me. But I believe my legacy will be that I led the U.S. in this war and preserved our democracy, and I turned over the gains of the government to our fantastic Vice President, Mr. Harry Truman. Although Mr. Truman might have to figure out how we finally defeat Japan, we have talked about other D-Day types of invasion which will cost a lot of lives. But maybe he can pick up some kind of super weapon so any invasion won't be necessary. Either way, in my opinion, the impact of World War II on Western civilization will never be forgotten. We may have failed the first time with our League of Nations, but after this war, we will try something like that again to prevent future wars. We will try to set up an organization of nations where we can come together and try to resolve our differences peacefully and without need for war. This war has devastated the West and impacted everyone on the planet. Millions of lives have been lost and destroyed.
And what was the impact on you?
To admit, this war has taken quite a toll on me. I have not slept much in years since leading war in a 24/7 job. I'm exhausted, and it's certainly a huge impact on my health. I hope I can last long enough to see it, though, to the very end. And I have many family and friends who have lost their loved ones in this war. Men who fell in combat. It has been hard. It's been a hard road, emotionally, for many of us. But it has also shown that we here in America have a strength and resolve and ability to stand up and fight for our freedom and freedom of our friends and allies.
What role do you see the U.S. playing in international community in the future after the war?
We don't want to be the world's policeman, but after this war, we might have to play that role for a while. We'll likely have the strongest economy, military, and we will be in the best position to rebuild Europe and provide security. So until we can get a new League of Nations up and running, we might just have to be the policeman. We'll keep a presence in some European countries with military bases, but that will just be temporary until Europe can take care of itself again. And all along the way, we'll consult with our European friends about what kind of assistance they want. We won't interfere in their internal affairs. We'll just help them rebuild and see to it they have all the financial and security assistance they need. Once Europe feels secure, we'll come back home to America and leave Europe to govern itself. In our new version of the League of Nations, I am sure we will play a very influential role. We have shown the world that a true democracy like ours, that has a citizen army, can really set an example for other countries to follow. We can persuade other nations to install democratic institutions in their societies and respect international laws. and to prioritize peace and prosperity. We can use our influence and strengthen to prevent conflicts not just in Europe but in Asia and here in our own hemisphere as well. I'm so optimistic we will be a force for goodwill into the future.
Welcome now to our podcast, our favorite ally in the East, the leader of the Soviet Union, known as Russia. He's the man of steel, Joseph Stalin. My pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. I have to talk to my interpreter since I have not had the time yet to learn English. So, have you been a first-hand witness and participant to the Second World War? Yes, that's right. I was there for the Russian Revolution, so I started with government in 1917, and have there for all the years leading up to the war against Germany, after they illegally invaded us. Roosevelt and Churchill fought against Germany for the West, but you fought on that Eastern front, so you must have a very different perspective. Would you talk about that? Yes, of course. Well, the war in the East where I was fighting was a war on an enormous scale. Battles like the one at Stalingrad were huge and not something that happened on the same scale in the West. Plus, even though many civilians in Europe were directly affected by the war, in the East, the scale of civilian suffering was gigantic. The Soviet Union lost about millions people during the war. So my perspective on the war is that it almost completely destroyed half of my country and annihilated an entire generation. It will take us years to recover, and it will likely need financial help to do it. And implications? For all of Europe, the impact of this war will never be forgotten. Much of the Germans, Poland's, and Russians, and all other countries will have to completely rebuild their infrastructures, transportations, electricity, schools, and hospitals. Armies will have to restart somehow, and of course, we can never bring back all the people we have lost, or undo the harm that violence did to destroy so many lives. Politically, we will have to see what happens. There are several ways things could go. I hope that my country and the US and England could work together to create a new Europe. My armies are coming in from the East, and we will denazify every country we take over. I hope the Americans and the English will do the same. And since we suffered more and carried a heavy burden than those other countries, we expect to have a huge influence over politics in the Europe since we've ended. That our allies will accept this. We do not intend to fight all through Europe and just to give up our gains. If we are criticized for this, that could cause a problem between us and our allies. I hope that doesn't happen. I heard Roosevelt said before that yes, he is willing to give Eastern Europe over to you. So that means you're getting what you want, right? Well, of course. It depends on where we define Eastern and Western Europe. Most people say German is in the Western Europe. But we are doing the heavy fighting in Germany, so who's to say we shouldn't be allowed to take over the whole country? And once you take over any of those countries after the war, what will be the implications for them? We will bring them peace and security. We will offer them protection from any future conflict and economic freedom. These people need a strong government, a strong can to rebuild their countries and stay on the right path. We in the Soviet Union can provide that strong hand which other powers like the United States of America cannot. Now it's not the right time for democracy for these countries. It has proven to be weak and vulnerable. So we provide the only system proven to be as strong and stable in other people around. The world will soon see the wisdom of our approach. So the implications for Eastern Europe will be life-changing, and the example was set there will hopefully be followed and imitated around the world. And wherever international organization, the West must step up like another League of Nations. It will insist on being one of its leading members. Nothing major can be decided by a body like without our direct involvement. From a point of view, corrupt democracies and capitalist systems cause both worlds wars, and Russia can act as a counterbalance to all the injustice the capitalism creates. We don't want other war, but we are prepared for another one. If that's what we have to do in order to secure freedom for the people. I just want my allies in the West to understand that. And now, if you excuse me, I have much work to do. Thank you for joining us today. And now, it's a real pleasure to introduce you and welcome the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Winston Churchill. Very much for having me on your very popular program. It's my pleasure. So, Prime Minister, you were a direct witness to World War II and also a participant.
Yes, that is correct. I had been involved in the government for many years, going back to before the First World War. So I have been in the government the whole time leading up to the outbreak of World War II. I even predicted it. I was warning the world of the dangers of the Nazis' war machines as I saw it getting ready to strike. I knew they were intended on one conquest, an aggression, in a large-scale war. I knew a war was coming up, and I knew we would need America's help.
And in England, your country was directly attacked by the Germans' place. After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. did not go through the same thing as you did. Our homeland was not directly attacked like that. For you, your capital of London was bombed, and many civilians died. So your perspective is unique compared for Roosevelt's.
Yes, that's correct. Stalin had it much worse than us. But yes, for us it was terrifying to have German planes flying over London and dropping bombs. We called it the Blitz, and it killed thousands of civilians and destroyed hundreds of homes and buildings. I would witness this every night and would see the horrific effects every day. So, from my perspective, I understand how vicious war can be. I also believe from my perspective that when we are confronted with this kind of evil, we must fight back and wage war ourselves. But this is why I ask America to mobilize to use its massive industrials base to produce war items, since we in England could never produce them in such large amounts. I knew we had to strategize and fight the war together. So this war was not avoidable. There was simply no way to negotiate with the Nazis or stop them from conquering more countries without us restoring to the use of force.
And what are the implications for the Western civilization?
Well, victory over the Nazis is really a first step. The war destroyed much of Europe, and so it needs to be rebuilt. But the real implication for Western civilization is political and military. I'm talking about the facts that between us, that is America and England, on one hand, and Russia on the other, there is a huge difference in how we see this world. Now that Europe is clearly divided between these two sides, I'm afraid we might find ourselves in a very tense situation. And since we both will both have large militaries in Europe for many years, if we are not careful, we could find ourselves in a third world war or third wide conflict. So we need a new type of League of Nations, but with a stronger capability than the last one, so that it can prevent future wars and maintain peace.
Your implications for you personally.
War has been exhausting for me, but I didn't intend to leave politics when it's over. Similar to Roosevelt, I have lost many family members and friends to this war. I've seen victims and suffering in my country on a daily basis. I know the pain caused by this war. I've gotten older as a result, but it made me stronger too. I have a stronger resolve to finish this war, rebuild Europe, and work to prevent future conflicts. I would like to see England remain as an influence in the international arena in the future. But I admit that right now we are not as strong as we used to be. So we look to America to take our place, not just to provide security and peace in Europe, but in all the world. I simply must at this point stop being diplomatic and speak bluntly. Only America is strong enough to play this role and to be counterbalanced against aggression from communism. I predict that even though the Russians are our allies today, tomorrow, they will be threatening Europe and the world with their evil ideologies. And so we need America to do all it can to contain the spread of communism all around the globe.
Thank you, Prime Minister Churchill, and thank you all for joining us today in this podcast. Be sure to tune in next time on The Factors. I'm your host, Patrick Hurley, and see you next time.